Okay, so John Keely developed an experiment which he claimed demonstrated the principles of sympathetic attraction, which, as its name suggests, is an attractive force that's developed via sympathetic acoustic resonance. There are several versions of this experiment, and I'm going to read a passage that describes one of the experiments from the book Free Energy Pioneer. So the name of this very interesting experiment is called Weights in Jars. In it, Keely is described to have attached one end of his platinum silver gold wire to his transmitter. This is the sympathetic transmitter that transmitted the vibrations. The other end was fastened to the metal cap of a glass jar. This was a glass jar such as chemists use, set on a heavy wooden table about 5 feet away from the transmitter. Upon examination, the jar proved to have a solid glass bottom. It was about 40 inches high and 10 inches in diameter. It was filled with what looked like and smelled like water from a local river in Pennsylvania. On the bottom of the jar, clearly visible through the water and resting directly on the glass, lay 3 iron discs, a 2-pound, a 1-pound, and a half-pound weight, such as one sees in the scales of a grocery store. The weights were examined and weighed by several of those present. Keely then took a bit of string out of his pocket and wound it around a little brass spindle in front of the cylinder on top of the transmitter, which he then jerked on the loose end to set the spindle whirling. Then he sat down by the transmitter and began striking the strings of what looked like a harp in the cupboard-like base of the transmitter. While one hand was playing on the strings of this harp, the other hand was moving about the resonant rods on top of the base of the transmitter, just beneath the cylinder where the spindle was whirling. Keely claimed that when the same note on both the rods and harp strings was struck, the force, sympathetic force, was at that instant generated and set into action. All depended on the exact note, for perhaps there was a false note. The massive weights at the bottom of the jar of water only quivered. One of them toppled off and fell to the bottom. Then all remained motionless. So he again sounded the harp in the cupboard and the resonant bars on top of it, explaining to one of the participants there that he was trying to get the mass chord of the weights. He described the mass chord as being a sympathetic chord, which every aggregation of molecules or all matter vibrated to. So basically it's like a resonant frequency, but rather than just a single note, it's a chord, which is a bass note and 2 or more harmonic notes played at the same time. So this was the medium. This chord was the medium through which Keely said he could operate this vibratory force. So the chord was not found for some minutes. Again, the spindle was spun on by the help of the twine, and its whiz was distinct in the silence of the room. The search for the mass chord continued on the harp and the resonant rods. Then a deep, clear note resounded from both at the same time, and at the instant it broke on the ear, the weight that lay on the bottom of the jar by itself quivered and then slowly but steadily moved up through the water, as if impelled by some irresistible force, until it impinged on the top of the jar. So I believe that Keely would describe this sympathetic attractive force as one arising from the actions of microvortices in the fluid. He claimed himself that certain frequencies, or rather chords, created vortices that had movement in the clockwise direction, while other chords created vortices with movement in a counterclockwise direction. He termed these the polar and antipolar, or rather the polar and dipolar forces, respectively. And of course, as any vortex, they can create pressure differentials both above and beneath them that can result in a net force. Okay, so this is my basic setup. I have two power lines. Each line has a 60 volt 2 amp transformer, and so the energy is rectified and stored like in a regular power supply. Here's a function generator, that switching circuit that switches off at a single frequency that I can set. It's controlled by power transistors, and what that does is activate what I call a resonator, which is made out of a soup can. So rather than using a musical instrument, I simply use a solenoid. It's basically turns of wire. I wrap them kind of parallel, and then I have a hole in the center to make the solenoid. I put rare earth, super strong rare earth magnets on the inside of a can, of the soup can. And simply put that over on the top and let it fit right within the solenoid. So the electromagnetic interaction makes it work just like a loudspeaker. This here is a plunger that I simply put on the top. I really don't even need to glue it down because the magnet holds it in place. And that transfers the vibrations kind of into the medium of water that I use. So here is just this is how I test the vibration circuit, just to make sure that it's operating properly. And so when I see the LEDs flash on and off, then I know that it's working. So I had to do a constant troubleshooting of this, but of this little $12 function generator that I got off on eBay. I'm able to have pretty good control over the frequency of vibrations that I send into the solenoid. Alright, so now I'm going to activate the circuit by turning on one of the power lines and be able to see and hear the vibrations. So I say that there's nothing like swirling or that stirring the water or anything like that. It's just purely sonic vibrations that are generated by the electromagnetic interaction between the permanent magnets and the solenoid, and then those are transferred through the piston there. Alright, so setting the resonator on top of the container with the plunger reaching into the bottom, I run through the frequencies until I hit one of the resonant modes of the can. And when I do that, the sympathetic force of attraction is generated, which lifts the egg up until it kind of impinges on the surface of the plunger. So even as the vibrations kind of die down in intensity, the egg kind of remains impinged on the surface for a few seconds before it falls back down. So I was able to improve the technique a little bit in order to attempt to lift the egg over a slightly larger distance. So recall from the earlier description of Keely's weights and jars experiment, he was able to operate the sympathetic force over a pretty significant distance. I believe it said that the jar that he used was about 40 inches deep. So keep in mind that here with the egg, I'm using really only one single frequency, whereas he was using a chord, which of course is a fundamental frequency, as well as 2 or 3 of its harmonics sounded in simultaneously. So I would assume that that would create probably a stronger interaction. Additionally, the Keely's goal was to, of course, find the resonance frequencies or whatever of the object. So, like here, really the only resonance is the resonance of the can, and so the resonance, the can, which is a cavity resonator, has several resonance modes. And so what I do is I sweep through the frequencies until I come upon one of those modes. When that happens, then the sympathetic force is generated. However, the egg itself is not resonating, and so my ideal, or what I want to get to, is to have an object which I can actually find out or calculate what the resonant frequency is, and then be able to play that resonant frequency with my circuit through the vibrator. And I think that when I do that there'll be a much stronger interaction, and that it will operate over a larger distance.